Hey, welcome to another episode of the Entrepreneur Journey. It's that's all about getting you unstuck and living your dream. I'm so excited to introduce you to our guest today, Mr. Akshay Nanavati, who is on a mission to run across every country in the world, every continent in the world. Recently, he dragged a sled full of supplies across Greenland, enduring all the snowstorms, and crossed the whole country from one end to another. Did the same with Singapore, and he is set to conquer the world. And so I'm so excited to introduce you to Mr. Akshay Nanavati. Akshay, thank you so much for spending time with us today.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm honored, so appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, we're going to jump straight in. Akshay, why don't you just introduce yourself to our viewers and give us a little bit about your background and what you're doing.
Sure. So a little bit about my background is I was born in India, and I kind of moved around all my life. I've lived in 10 different cities and traveled a lot at a young age with my family. And when I moved to the U.S. at 13, I wasn't very sure of who I was. I was not a very confident person back then, so I happened to get into a crowd. And not that I ever blamed the crowd, because ultimately we all take responsibility for our own actions, and as do I. But not that I ever blamed the crowd, but I got into a crowd, started doing a lot of drugs, and kind of squandered away a good year and a half of my life. And two people who started that journey with me are no longer alive today as a result.
Wow.
So that was kind of my early years, and what got me out of that was the decision to join the Marine Corps.
Okay.
I decided to serve a higher cause than myself and really test myself and discover what I'm made of, what I'm capable of. So when I decided to join the Marine Corps, that was really the trigger point for me to change my whole life.
Okay.
Once I joined the Marines, I almost overnight stopped doing drugs. I started training. I started building myself up physically and mentally. And I had to overcome some obstacles just to get into the Marines because I have a blood condition called thalassemia. So essentially it means I have less hemoglobin in my blood than the average man. And so 2 doctors told me that boot camp would kill me because of this blood condition. So I did what any person would do, and I went to a 3rd doctor. And I got that letter, took that to the recruiter, joined the Marines finally after about a year and a half waiting around to get medical waivers and things like that because it's a disqualifying condition.
Okay.
Finally I got in, went to the Marines, and that's when I started getting into outdoor sports and really pushing myself and challenging myself in other more positive ways to get that sort of same high, I guess, in a more positive way, in a way that requires psychological, spiritual energy. It requires a commitment, it requires physical, you have to do something. It's not just something it's not just an unnatural high, you know?
Yeah, sure.
So through that, I did Greenland in 2012. I've now been cave diving, skydiving, ice diving, you name it. I've been fortunate to have experienced a whole lot of outdoor adventures. And that's kind of what inspired this latest journey to run across every country in the world.
Okay.
Because as I mentioned, I love traveling. One of the coolest things about traveling is that you connect with people from all over the world, and you get to see all these amazing cultures and how unique every individual is. But yet, despite that uniqueness, we are all essentially the same. All human beings have the same motivations. We struggle with the same issues. We all face adversity. We all experience joy, and it's a beautiful thing to see that. The connection that I feel with people when I travel, when I experience the culture in a really deep level.
Yeah, sure.
And what better way to see a land than run through it? When we travel, usually we're often driving through it or flying over it, So by running it, you get to experience the land, you get to experience the people, and it's my own personal journey of pushing myself beyond any limits that I thought possible.
Okay. Let's talk about motivation for a bit. You said at one point in your life you were sort of in with the wrong crowd, down the path of drugs, and then you made that switch, and you said searching for something beyond yourself or engaging in something beyond yourself. What do you think it took for you and for most people to make that switch from a mediocre kind of lifestyle to something beyond that?
Yeah. I think, I'll tell you a little bit what it was for me, and then kind of paint a bigger picture on that, and what it takes in general, I think, at least in my opinion. So, for me, it was a movie Black Hawk Down. Have you seen that movie?
Yeah, a while ago.
Yeah, so there's a scene in the movie where there's two guys who are up in a chopper. They're fairly safe from the danger, and they volunteer to come on the ground to save a fellow comrade, a fellow soldier, who's down on the ground in a crashed chopper from thousands of armed enemy coming their way.
Okay.
They volunteer to come down, not having to. They volunteer, and both of them died. And they died, but the person who they saved, he's alive today as a result of their actions.
Yeah.
They received the highest military award for valor, the Medal of Honor, as a result of what they did. So watching that movie triggered something in me. It made me ask myself, what would I do in that situation? What kind of courage does it take for a human being to do that? To me, it was just mind-blowing. And so I started reading books on combat in the military, and that's when I changed my life because I decided to answer that question for myself and really see, would I be able to do that? What would this what would such extreme circumstances bring out of me? So that was a trigger that led to the switch that changed my life really forever.
Okay.
And I think to kind of paint the bigger picture on what does it take for anybody to make that switch, I think it's a big enough why. It's something that, it's some exposure, something that we can proactively seek out, or sometimes it just hits us. You know, I wasn't necessarily ready to stop my life of drugs. It came to me. But often now I proactively seek it out, like this running across the world. I had kind of put running on the side, just focusing on my business and other things like that.
Yeah.
So I wanted something that inspired me. So I proactively sought something out, like this journey, to inspire me to get out. And now running is in my dreams. You know, I'm picking up my mileage insanely fast. So I think that it takes either something by, you know, call it accident, fate, universe, whatever you want to call it,
Yeah.
or a proactive seeking out of something to inspire us to be better than ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think a lot of people are really striving for that and trying to find that really big enough why that you mentioned. From your experience, and I know you do a lot of personal coaching as well, what do you think really holds a lot of people back?
I think, I mean, one of the biggest things is often fear. It's lack of clarity. Almost everybody I talk to have no clue what they even want, you know? They'll say things like, I want more money. How much more money? And they have no idea.
Yeah.
So it's a lack of clarity on your vision.
Okay.
I think it's a big one is fear. Another big one is sort of the blaming circumstances.
Yeah.
You know, oh, well, my life is this. Your life may be this, but my life is this. Or, you know, the economy's bad or something like that. You know, Jack Canfield often says that in his book, The Success Principles, he said the number one principle, the one that's kind of fundamental to all others, is taking 100% responsibility for your life.
Yeah.
I call it the warrior mindset, where they're not blaming, whining, complaining. You actually embrace whatever circumstances it may be and make the best of it and do something with it.
Yeah, and you've got a whole philosophy really on fear. I know you're putting together a book. Can you share with us a little bit of that?
Sure, yeah. So when I talk to people about fear, fear often has a negative connotation. People see it as being something bad. You know, I've heard sometimes people say that there's two ways of looking at life, through fear and love. And you can say the word. It's not received with a positive light. You know, it's almost something to be avoided. I've seen books called Fearless or Be Fearless, and this idea of fearlessness to me is silly. It's a misconception.
Okay.
Because fear, neurologically speaking, it's a natural part of life. Whenever we do something we've never done before, which ultimately, if you want new results, if you want something you've never gotten before, you got to do something you've never done before.
Yeah.
You got to be someone you've never been before. You know. So in order to do that, you take a risk. You inherently take a risk by venturing out to an unknown place for you. The mind's response to risk is naturally fear. It's neurologically conditioned into us.
Okay.
So instead of running from it, is to embrace it. Is to actually welcome fear and not see it as a negative thing and see it as just a human thing that we all experience.
Yeah.
Because the more we resist it, you know, I think I was mentioning to you that I've spoken in a middle school once, and these kids felt that being afraid was weak. So I'm not afraid of anything, you know. It is kind of false sense of bravado. And what happens when that happens is that then when fear does show up, like let's say they do something scary, it's almost like, oh, I'm feeling afraid, so I'm weak, so let me not do this thing that scares me.
Yeah.
So that's why I see that fear is such a big blocker, because people don't want to get scared because they see themselves as being weak for having fear.
Yeah. Okay, so if fear is this neurological response, what happens when it becomes physiologically crippling, when it actually has a physical effect and cripples you? You've embraced it, but you're stuck. Now what?
Got it. Yeah, and that's a great question. So to kind of look at it neurologically, you know, and I'll kind of talk about spiritually as well, there's a concept that Buddha says called 2 darts, that all human beings are stabbed with 2 darts.
Okay.
So I'll give you a metaphor. Let's say I stub my toe against a door. That first dart is the pain in the toe, right?
Okay.
The toe hurts. The second dart is when I say this door is stupid, I'm stupid, the world is stupid, God hates me, or whatever, all the things we start saying about it.
Okay.
So that's a spiritual concept of Buddha and the 2 darts. Neurologically, it's been shown that we don't control what first shows up in our brain.
Okay.
So this fear shows up in your brain. And I had one client who actually had this issue. Every time he got on his computer to write, anxiety, he had a physiological reaction, sweat, increased heartbeat, and it's natural to have a physiological reaction. Now, what most people told this client to do was essentially would help him work around avoiding this anxiety. But the biggest misconception and the biggest realization that when I shared this with people, just the simple awareness that what first shows up in your brain is beyond your control, I found it to be transformational for people that hear this, because then they start judging themselves as weak for having fear. They stop judging themselves as weak for having anxiety. And when you actually sit with an emotion and just be with it fully, you lessen the physiological impact of that fear.
Okay.
So you actually sit with it and then realize, and okay, so now I'm afraid. And I was telling you that I'm afraid on a weekly basis. Before my long runs that are now about to be 7-8 hours of running, I'm always nervous. I get butterflies in my stomach. Some days it's so easy to find a reason not to go after that run, right? I mean, I got to spend 8 hours running now. But accepting that it's there, sitting with it, and realizing what's the greater thing that lies on the other side of that fear. I think it was Mandela who said, courage is not the absence of fear. It's the recognition that something is greater or something more important than that fear.
Wow. That's
so
really
just
good.
recognizing it, being with it, and then finding what for you lies on the other side of it.
That's great. So for most people, when they have that neurological response, it's almost tied in together with the physiological, but then you're saying when you create that awareness, that kind of breaks that pattern.
Exactly. The first step, like one of the things I tell people to tell yourself is actually, it's not me, it's my brain. So you're separating yourself from your brain. And it's a very spiritual concept that, who are we ultimately? Are we our emotions? If that's who we were, we would change our inherent essence of who we are would change on a regular basis. One day I'm sad, one day I'm happy, one day I'm angry. So we're not our emotions, we're not our thoughts. Our thoughts are constantly changing. So who we are on a deeper level is something I don't even know if I have an answer to. We all have an essence within us. But if we separate ourselves from the brain, from the thought patterns, from the emotions, we realize that they're not who we are. And who we are is that greatest self, the greatest self we're aiming to. And it doesn't have to be running across the world. It can be whatever it is for you. For me, that's my mission. So that's who I define myself as. That's who I focus on when I'm scared to go for a run. When I'm scared to run across the country. I mean, standing on the far left, for the far east of Singapore, knowing that I had about 33 miles ahead of me, never having run anywhere close to that distance, nervous, scared. Ultimately, I could just keep putting one foot in front of the other. So that embrace that fear and just take a step. It's not hard to take one step. And it's the compound effect of those actions consistently taken over time that always lead to the results, no matter what results you seek.
That's huge. That's great advice. I think it's going to be a game changer for a lot of people.
Now,
with this big, massive dream you've got of running across every continent, and I'm sure you've had this before where people, I guess, feel inadequate comparing themselves with you, thinking, oh, Akshay's running across the world. My dream is crummy compared to that. I shouldn't pursue this dream. What's your response to that situation?
Yeah, and it's a great question again, because I get that. I've done a speech once where after the speech, these two young girls came up to me and said, you make us feel like shit. We haven't done anything with our lives. And I was like, that's not at all the intention. I want this to be inspirational, not something like that you haven't done anything. So what I started doing after that was to kind of tweak my speech and ultimately always share the message that your goal, as long as it's who you are, what you got to do, whether you want, let's say, some people I know want to live on a farm for the rest of your life. Cool. If that's what your life is, that's what your goal is. Work to create that for you. It doesn't have to be something like running across every country in the world. It can be whatever your goal is. And what I try to share in my message is that I want to use this also, in any dream in life. I think there's two motivations. There's a self-motivation, which I've kind of shared, pushing my limits, the traveling. There's a greater than self-motivation. And for me, I'm obviously raising funds for charity as well and doing a lot of that stuff. But for me, I also want people to see that it is possible to do anything. I mean, I am the least qualified person to do this. There's runners who are far superior to me. I'm not very fast. As I mentioned, I have a blood condition. I'm flat-footed. I have scoliosis in my back. Doctor still told me I have bad knees. I'm not even close to qualified to doing this thing, So, so to show people that it doesn't matter, what you're born with. It doesn't matter what your past is. It doesn't matter what your genetics may be. You can create whatever you want to be, and whether that be running across the world or whether that mean sitting down with your family. Just I want to spend every day working at home with my family. I want to work on a farm. That's cool. Your dream is your dream, and yes, naturally, human beings do tend to compare ourselves to others. We all do it. I compare myself to runners better than myself. And I have to remind myself that I'm on my own journey. So what if I can't run a 100-mile week just yet? Eventually, I'll get there, but that's my journey. So if you're going to use comparison to yourself, which human beings naturally do, just start to realize the only person you should compare yourself to is yourself. And realize that I may not be at 100 miles a week, but I'm a lot more than I am last week, for me. So whether it's, I'm one step closer to creating, I have a client that was in Puerto Rico that wanted to just, create an agricultural system in his area and kind of like a farm type thing. And that was his journey. And now he's advancing in that and just comparing himself to where he was. That's what it's all about. As long as you're growing in your own journey, mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally, what Stephen Covey from the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, he calls it the whole person paradigm. So I call it the 4 elements of the human experience. All of us experience those 4 elements, the mind, body, heart, and spirit. And so if you're just growing in whatever way that may be for you, then so be it. You know.
That's great. Growing in your own journey. That's awesome advice.
Yeah.
Now, as you've grown in your own journey, what would you say would be the greatest highlight so far?
I would say the thing I'm sort of most proud of is probably the experience in the Marines.
Okay.
Especially because of who I was in that that transformation I made from this life of drugs to joining the Marines. Because since then, some of the things I've done, I've been proud of myself. You know, I've started a business, been able to run it successfully. I traveled to seven new countries last year, and being able to do that as a result of my business, that's been great. But the person I was before I did that was almost very similar. And yes, I've grown in many ways. I'm growing now as I do my running thing. But the reason I find the Marine to be my greatest accomplishment was because I made such a radical shift in my life. And to go from that one person I was, this drug, wasting my life with drugs, to joining the Marines. And that shift to me is the thing I'm most proud of. And my service in Iraq, the brotherhood I formed, that experience out there, I mean, that was life-changing for me. It changed who I am. It's what helped me discover this reality that we can't always control our circumstances, but we can control how we respond to them. I mean, to share a quick story in Iraq, 2 months into Iraq, I remember reading my journals recently. I was angry. I hated my life out there. Miserable with the officers, hated the world, hated this environment, hated everything. I would retreat into myself, write in my own journal, spend time away from people. And I realized I had 5 more months left. If war is not going to change, I could hate the next 5 months of my life and go back home an angry, miserable person. Or I could realize that I can control my attitude towards it. Viktor Frankl from Man's Search for Meaning saying the last of human freedoms is the ability to control our attitude, to choose one's own way in any set of circumstances. So that trigger in Iraq is when it hit me that no matter what happens, I can control my attitude to it. And that's our greatest power. That's our greatest power as human beings.
Wow, that's huge. That's really neat.
So we control ultimately everything, if that happens, even when life is outside our control.
Man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So someone comes to you stuck, they've got their dream in their mind, not sure how to get it into action. 3 practical steps you'd give them. 3
practical steps. So I always mention, getting clarity in the vision. And one thing that people don't often find it motivating, but is that one of the strongest tips I give people is to embrace the mundane. Embrace what is boring. Getting successful is not always easy. It's not always fun. And that's something I don't often see people kind of share that, but it's a Darren Hardy quote. I can't remember the exact quote, but he says essentially success is hard, it's tedious, it's boring, it's mundane. And it's not motivating, but it's a reality. It's the same thing in running. Putting one foot in front of the other for hours can get boring sometimes. It can get tedious, it can get painful. But that's the key to success. So get clarity on your vision, embrace the mundane part of the journey, and just be consistent. Keep putting one foot in front of the other. You may not get results right away, and often sometimes you don't. But celebrate, and I guess if I had to kind of, put a sort of 3.5 to that, is to celebrate the little wins as well. That's one thing that I don't see a lot of people do, and I always encourage people I work with to do that. We get so caught up in our journey, we forget to stop and celebrate. We achieve one thing, and that's what school, I think, sets us up for. We get 1A, great, let's go to the next test. And it's always the next. We don't stop to celebrate the wins. And by celebrating the wins, you reinforce on a neurological level as well as on a psychological level to yourself that these actions are taking you in the right direction. So, after a long run, I don't care how slow I am, I celebrate it. I'm proud of myself. Even if that celebration just means a pat on the back. I'm reinforcing it to myself emotionally, because what you're doing is creating a pathway that essentially says long run equals positive emotion, and I'm breaking down a simple level. But when you celebrate those little wins in a boring, mundane, tedious journey, it starts to make it easier psychologically, which is ultimately what drives all our actions, is our mind, right? It starts to make it easier psychologically to keep moving forward when the path to success is boring and tedious. Yeah, that's really good. So get clarity first on the goal. Clarity exactly on what you want to create. Embrace the mundane. Celebrate the small wins. Celebrate the small wins. Yeah, exactly. Really good. Really good. Thanks, bro. 3 questions that I always like to finish every interview with. First one, who's been the greatest influence on your life? I guess there's been a couple people, but I think in recent years I would probably say, my dad and mom have been great sources of influence for me throughout my life. I've had a great childhood. They've given me a lot, and I'm really blessed to have a lot of what I have and the opportunities I've had. But in recent years, as a sort of mentor, is Jack Canfield, the author of Chicken Soup for the Soul series. He's been a really amazing mentor. He's someone I really admire in the personal development industry, and he's done a lot to help me in this journey and to get me where I'm at. Also to help me, work through some of the issues I had post Iraq and all that. Be in a positive way to get me. He was, inspired me on this journey to run across every country in the world. So he's been a big source of inspiration. Awesome. Yeah. What kind of a legacy or impact are you wanting to leave
on this world through your work?
Wow, big one. I would say, you know, and again, not to be cliche, is I want people to, I guess, the biggest thing I want to see, because, you know, with all the journeys that I've been on from the Marines to running across the world now, is to have people find the gift in adversity. I actually think that would make the biggest transformation in the world, because everybody suffers.
Yeah.
You, me, anybody watching this, anybody in the world across the street, at some point they've gone through struggle, they've gone through challenge, they've gone through suffering. And yet technology around us is often making life, every new piece of technology is out there to make life easier and easier and easier and easier, right? So in some way, although suffering and adversity is a natural part of the human condition, there's so much out there that we seek to avoid it. We seek to make life easier. But I think when we can find the value in the gift that is in adversity, it can ultimately change the face of the planet. Because I think ultimately people will all see, that's what to me running is showing, you know, it's self-inflicted adversity, obviously. It's not like been brought upon me as it has for many people. But we can find meaning through that, and we can use that as a source of inspiration, not as a crutch, not as a source of, like, not as a breakdown, not as something that comes in the way of success, but as a source of inspiration for success. So I have some long-term entrepreneurial journeys that I want to create, sort of like an online, offline platform that I want to create in the future to help people with clear frameworks that help people do this, that help people find their own gift in adversity, so they can ultimately, and again, you know, coming back to the 3 tips I talked about, embracing the mundane. That's essentially embracing adversity, right? Like embracing the struggle that is the journey to success. And I think that, to me, is what I see as making the greatest shift.
Wow.
So having people see the gift in that.
You're really going to challenge and flip a lot of people's views on seeing adversity and looking at fear, right?
Yeah, that's what I think is one of the biggest blocks in people's path to success is that framing of the way it's currently framed on a sort of larger level. It's the same thing with PTSD and veterans. You know, they go through the same thing because of these issues.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank
Last
you.
question. What's your definition of success?
I think success is progress in those 4 elements of the human experience, right? So mind, body, heart, and spirit. And often these days, I add finances into that category as well, because obviously we all need money. There's nothing, you know, evil about it. It helps us make a greater impact in the world. So I think progress in that. So let's say 1 year from today, I have made progress in these realms. I'm successful.
Yeah.
And, you know, so I don't think there's an end result to be had. Everybody has their own end result they want. You know, some people want to make $100,000, some people want to make $1 million, some people want to make $1 billion. Whatever. That doesn't mean if you make $1 million or 100,000, you're more successful, because many people who make less are actually happier than those who have more, right? Yeah. So if you're making progress, you're constantly moving forward in life, that's successful.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, check out the show notes. We'll have links for you to follow Akshay's work, watch him run across every country in the world, and he also does personal coaching if you want to connect there and just pick his brain and learn from him and have him motivate you. Jump on the website and all the details will be in the show notes. Akshay, any final words to everyone watching?
Just again, embrace your own journey, whatever it may be for you. Embrace that, get clear on it, and reward yourself as you keep working towards it. There's no right or wrong about any journey we want. Just celebrate your own path in life.
Love it. Awesome. Akshay and Nanavati, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for this. It's been a real pleasure. I enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for the honor.
Appreciate it, man. Go out and get it. See you later.